Hi, this is Michelle Capobianco. I'm the CEO of Pancreatic Cancer Canada, and you're listening to our podcast, Unapologetic. Our guest today is André Louis, the CEO of the And-Partnership, which is the advertising agency that Pancreatic Cancer Canada has been fortunate enough to work with for the past 7 years. So welcome, André.
Thank you very much for having me today, Michelle.
Thank you. So the title of the podcast is Unapologetically Yours. And so we want to talk about what you as a leader are unapologetic about, how you approach your career, potentially your personal life as well, work relationships. Want to dig into a bit about the partnership between pancreatic cancer and the And-Partnership, how it came to be, where it's at, how we do things differently. Maybe I'll just start with something you and I were chatting a bit about before we went live here, and that is the use of the word unapologetic. I feel that often people who work in the charitable field approach virtually everything from an apologetic standpoint. We're sorry to be bothering you. We're sorry to be asking you for money. We're sorry to be having to talk to you about this awful disease. We're sorry to be asking for something for free. And yet it's so against or so anti how we should be looking at things, and if we want to progress, how we should be behaving. I'm really proud that I have stepped into this void and that I am asking for money and raising money and asking for help and assistance to bring attention to this disease. I do it on behalf of so many other people. And so why I would apologize for having to do this is crazy to me when I step back and think about it, but we often approach it from that perspective. And so I just wonder what your experience has been like working with other charities, and when they have no doubt approached you in the past, what that approach looks like and what your feeling about it is when a charity approaches you.
Sure. Look, I think that's a great observation, and definitely, charities by definition rely on other people and the goodwill of other people to further their cause. And I think straight away that puts you in the role of supplicant. And if you're coming to an advertising agency or if you're going to a donor base, it always feels that you're asking people for things, which is always uncomfortable, isn't it, Michelle? And you'll know that from your history in the industry as well. And I think the really fascinating reframe, and one of the things that we've really enjoyed being your partners with, is helping change that power dynamic. So we got incredibly enthusiastic and inspired by the change of tone in the conversation. And I think that word unapologetic has not just changed the way your organization is approaching its task, rather than seeking sympathy, which is the typical mode of charity, and asking for a handout. You're actually challenging the status quo, and you're going out there and you're fighting the fight for a cause that hasn't had enough attention, it hasn't had enough funding. So doing things in the typical way just isn't going to cut through in the way that you need it to. If you want to make a difference, you have to change the dynamic. And I think that shines through in the work that PCC does, both as an organization and the approach it's taking to pancreatic cancer, but also the tone of the brand as well. It turns out very differently in the marketplace.
I should give credit where it's due in that Pancreatic Cancer UK ran a campaign about a decade ago. Basically, I'd rather have any other kind of cancer rather than pancreatic. So I'd rather have breast cancer. I'd rather have colon cancer. And it caused quite a stir for those people that had been affected by the other cancers, were quite offended. But it really drew attention to the plight of pancreatic. And I loved that ad. I loved how brave it was. And so when I first spoke with Jack Shute at your agency, I talked about that and said, that's the kind of cutting edge that we want to present in Canada. We want to really talk about this differently. So you were in charge of the creative for our first Assumptions campaign. Do you want to chat a bit about coming up with that idea, and also how you thought we was going to land with us, how you thought we were going to react? Because you presented 7 or 8 different ideas, if I remember correctly. And it was that one that I just loved, but it was so different from all the others. And so what was that like as an advertiser as well, to be able to present that and have a client say, yeah, I want to do something that a lot of people are going to dislike, or that who may have a reaction to?
Look, it's a real joy having an unapologetically brave client to work with who knows that doing more of the same just doesn't get you attention. And if you look at the world we live in, we're just inundated with commercial messaging from the moment we wake up, and we're checking email and Instagram on our phones through to the minute we go to sleep. You have to do something different to break through and be noticed. And I think that campaign that you referenced from the UK was incredibly bold. It certainly was provocative. And you just can't afford to be lost in the middle ground anymore. I think there are so many messages out there that if you're not turning heads, then you're just not getting the attention that you need. So we knew that we wanted to approach this task embracing your unapologetic mindset and really go for it and create something that would make us uncomfortable. That's always a good benchmark. And I think your instincts when you saw the range of work and really bravely chose the one that was the most provocative, that probably made us all the most uncomfortable, was brilliant. And I think the success of that campaign is really testament to the fact that we knew that some people would love it and others would hate it, but at least you're getting a strong reaction either way. And if we could reach 10 people in a really powerful, impactful way, suddenly that's making a difference rather than trying to please all people, but really reaching no one.
And we actually got significantly less flack for that campaign than I expected. I'm hoping that we can put something up and so people can see the campaign we're talking about. But it was called Assumptions Can Be Deadly. And the idea was that mild back pain, that mild nausea, which could well be symptoms of pancreatic cancer, you could assume they were nothing. And we had been looking for some way to draw attention to the pancreas, pancreatic cancer, in a similar way to the way breast cancer groups had with booby ball, and ovarian cancer had done with lady balls. And we kind of laughed and said, how do you make the pancreas sexy? I mean, it's not really a sexy organ. And unbelievably to us, we never really looked at the pancreas closely, I guess, but your team did look at the pancreas, and it's a 6-inch organ that when pixelated looks quite like another 6-inch male organ. And so we had a lot of fun with that, assuming that you know what this 6-inch organ is. It starts with a P and ends with an S and even has an N in the middle. And it really did get people talking and laughing a bit and being a bit more open to talking about pancreatic cancer. And as I said, I took phone calls about pancreatic cancer that complaining about the ad, and neither were complaining about the pixelated picture. They both, in fact, complained about us baldly stating that there's a 90% mortality rate. One person had the disease, was worried his 15-year-old daughter would now know the statistics if she heard our ad. And the other person was a driver for another cancer organization and was worried it would depress people in the back of the car to hear those ads. And that's fascinating to me because it really speaks to this temptation that we have around this disease and other diseases to not be clear and not be bold and not talk about what it is. You and I both come from a generation where even the word cancer used to be whispered. So if you'd say somebody was ill, you'd say, I think they had cancer. You wouldn't actually say the word out loud. And we've come a long way, but I would suggest that with pancreatic, we're still whispering that word. We're still saying it was pancreatic cancer. It was the bad one. And we don't want to come out and talk about it and be honest and forthright. And if we're not willing to do that, how can we ever start tackling it? And so if we're not unapologetically talking about this disease, how can it ever change? So let's switch gears a bit and talk about you and your career and where you've had to be unapologetic and how that credo drives you.
Sure. Well, I think unapologetics it's a really fascinating word, isn't it? And I think first of all, applied to the work that we did for pancreatic cancer, we needed to be unapologetic to break through, and I think that takes a creative confidence, that is necessary in the industry. I think the industry is changing along with many other industries out there. I mean, the nature of work has changed dramatically in the last 2 or 3 years. We've gone through obviously a almost unprecedented global pandemic. Following that, we've gone through the Great Resignation, where people sort of came out of the pandemic and really questioned their priorities in life. I think now we're going through the Great Reset, where the nature of work is changing, and employees of companies such as our advertising agency are looking for something very different. And I grew up in a different system. So I started in the industry in the early 90s, and you worked really, really hard. You never asked for promotion. They were granted every now and again once you had proved yourself over and over. Praise was not lavishly distributed. You became quite self-sufficient and self-reliant. You needed to have a quietly burning self-belief to get you through all of that. And I think a lot of that is changing. And I think, I'm having to now constantly challenge my past experiences in the industry to make sure that I'm better in sync with what people are looking for or from the organizations that they choose to work with today. So big change there in terms of our society. We've got new generations now hitting the marketplace, and our industry is a traditionally younger one. So we've now got people working for us who were born in this millennium. And they're looking for different things. They're looking for work-life balance. They value well-being. They're looking for personal growth, and they want to really connect with an organization on a deeper level. They want that sense of purpose, and they want to connect to an organization that has a strong set of values that they can align with as well. So these are all very, very different sort of criteria from when I started in the industry, where you needed to kick down the door and find a way to get in and just do anything to get your way in there. Where there was a conveyor belt of people who would happily take your job tomorrow. I think all this has changed. And the interviews that we have now, almost the first question people ask is, what is your policy regarding working remotely? This work-life balance and flexibility around that has really kicked in. And where do you stand on ESG issues as well? So people are looking for bigger things now from the organizations they choose to invest their time and part of their career with. So when that comes to leadership, I think for me, my journey, I guess, has been really finding a way that was my way, and building trust in my methods, and that meant really reconnecting with or identifying the values that were important to me, and then consistently applying them. And that came about through early on in the role, where I didn't have a lot of role models who perhaps put people first. So a lot of that was sort of personal. You're learning on the job, and it came from a lot of reflection where you're making decisions, and some of them just didn't sit right. And then others, which were big, nasty decisions, actually felt very easy and intuitive. And it took me a while to figure out that, I really needed to be in tune with my personal values, and trust those, and trust that they would guide the organization on the right path.
That's so interesting when you talk about personal values, because as you were talking about the generation you grew up in is the same one I grew up in, and started work in the early 90s and had to work really, really hard and expect that everybody else is going to work really, really hard before they get that office. And now they're working smarter. And I'm thinking, but I had to work really hard before I could work smart. Why do you get to be smart right from the beginning? And it does really challenge you. Am I a dinosaur? Am I looking at things just a way that doesn't exist anymore? And how can I look at things differently? What I try and remember is what it felt like to be an employee, to be a real cog in a wheel. So I worked in a charity before this one where I really was a cog in the wheel. And I remember all of the different ways we were treated by leadership and the things that I would say, I'm never going to do that. I'm going to do that differently. Something as simple as, for instance, coffee. They brought a coffee machine in to our office, 100 employees, and it cost a quarter to have a cup of coffee. And employees were now going to have to pay to have a cup of coffee. And this was acceptable. And I was in charge of business development. And if corporate clients came in and they wanted a coffee, I had to go find my wallet and give money for coffee. We have a coffee machine here. I don't expect people to pay for coffee. And so I try to remember those things. And I came along feeling those were wrong and that I can change those now. And so let's change them and let's work smarter. But you're right. You have to really talk to yourself and question your own values and thoughts and how you got here. Let's switch gears a bit and talk about the current campaign we're under right now, which is we've raised enough sympathy. It's time to raise survival rates. Another campaign created by the And-Partnership, which we absolutely love and have had such good feedback from family members, people living with the disease, people who have lost someone, who agree, who say it's enough sympathy. I don't want to hear how sad you feel for me. Let's change the paradigm. And it's so not the way most charities talk. It's all about hope, and it's all about feeling badly and wishing you could do more, as opposed to actually getting up and doing more and changing things. And as we're coming forward into 2023 and beyond, we brought a new challenge to you and the agency. And that is we wanted to start talking about death and how we dealt with death as an organization, as a society. With a 90% mortality rate, we have a responsibility to help people when they come to either a realization that their life is ending or that the medical assistance has ended. And so we really began a conversation with you around how do we, on the one hand, talk about survival and increasing survival and being there for the fight for people, and yet also being there for people who are wrapping up their lives often much earlier than they wanted to. And so maybe you can talk a bit about that challenge that was brought to you, about how we're both things, because you and I have had some great conversations, and early on you really nailed it for us about how we could work right in the middle. So I'd like for you to describe how you took that challenge on.
Sure, and I think it's it was a wonderful realization from our partners at PCC that while you're out there fighting the good fight and really trying to create a positive impact on that mortality rate, there are still a lot of people who are really challenged by this disease, and it extends beyond the person, but into their family and loved ones as well. And every single time we talk to you and your team, you share these amazing stories of resilience and these raw conversations that people are having. And I just think it's incredibly generous to acknowledge and recognize that help extends beyond trying to find better odds for this disease. I think help means also being there for the people who the odds are not in their favor. And as you said earlier in this chat, there are things that we are terrible at talking about in society, and I think this is the next evolution of that. We're terrible at talking about money, even as sort of married couples, money's almost the number one source of stress and tension in marriages and relationships. We're atrocious at talking about health. And I know that to be true as a male. Every time you go to the doctor, there's discomfort, and it's really hard to have an open and honest conversation about something that's on your mind. And I think that really led us to our first campaign about challenging assumptions. But this is the next evolution. And I think we need to take the conversation now to a next stage, which is we also need to get better at talking about death. And I think there are so many facets to unpack within that. But to help people have the conversations that they need to equip them with the knowledge that they can apply to maybe lead to a more dignified ending, one that is where we can reduce trauma as much as possible. I think is it's uncomfortable to acknowledge that death is the outcome for too many people with this disease. But there are things that we can do about that as well, and provide comfort and knowledge and education, and I think hopefully some form of relief just by way of conversation. So I think that's a big topic. I think it's a very sensitive one. I think it's hard to get right, and I know some other brands have gone out there and they've tried to talk about this topic, and it just hasn't landed. So it's important to make sure that we're guided by, I think, the sensibility that you and your team bring to the equation to make sure that these conversations are had in exactly the right way.
It's been interesting as I talk to people about death, people in the business of not-for-profit, my peers who work for other organizations that where people also pass away from it, and how they want to manage it. And by and large, they don't want to manage it. They don't want to talk about it. Their mandate from their board is to focus on hope. And the concern always is, if they're not focusing on hope, that donations will dry up. Why am I going to support an organization if you've given up? And so to express to people that you've hardly given up, but with the disease, that the statistics haven't changed in 50 years, at some point, you also need to address the reality that 9 out of 10 people are not going to make it. And so how are you going to help and support those people becomes really important. But the conversations and the objections that come up, to your point, how other people have done it, has been really interesting. And so we all watch the commercial or the ad spot. I guess not even an ad spot isn't even the right language for it, that Simon's did. Simon did a spot, and was it just on YouTube they did that spot? Do you know?
Yes, yeah,
Just on YouTube?
it ran online as a piece of online content.
So it was a piece of online content about a woman who was terminally ill, and showed her celebrating and bringing together all of her friends at a beach party to celebrate the end of her life. And I think it was pretty clear in it that she was choosing medical assistance in dying. She was quite young. She was in her late 30s, early 40s. There was a lot that it was inferred. But the part at the end that came up was Simon's logo. Simon is a retailer, and their logo came up at the end. And so there was some connection with the logo. And so you and I started a dialogue about it. What does it mean? Is it a way to sell clothes? I think the line was that beauty comes in different ways, in different shapes and forms. So my first reaction was, this is so lovely, because woman is still beautiful while she's dying, while she's terminal, while she's celebrating. It is still beautiful. I really didn't get the connection with selling clothes. I didn't see it quite as tight, but I assumed that the CEO at the time had been moved by this story and really felt moved to do something. It was interesting as it became more and more public, the conversation that came out. And one of the things that came out was, and I read this somewhere, but this woman's friends came forward and said she really didn't want to die. There was no treatment available for what she had. And so I think for a number of us, that gave us pause, and we thought, oh, that's different. Maybe this shouldn't have happened. There shouldn't be that ad. And then I thought, well, nobody wants to die. And there being no treatment is actually exactly the same in pancreatic cancer. It's not that there's no desire to be a treatment. It's not that people aren't looking for a treatment, but there is no treatment. And so I really came full circle with that and really embraced it. But I think that there was a fair bit of surprise in the industry as well as amongst the public. So can you speak about that at all from an industry perspective? It seems quite a deviation to advertise and talk about death and align it with a clothing brand. What were your thoughts when you saw it?
So I think the challenge that a lot of people had in viewing that spot was trying to find the connection and the link between the retailer and the subject matter. And regardless of the approach they took or how beautifully they executed the spot, I think ultimately that connection was a bit too far for people to make. I think, on the other hand, coming from pancreatic cancer, the link is very clear. And I think it is a necessary conversation, um, because the reality is a lot of people are going to have to face, this terrible, tragic outcome. And I think it's wonderful to champion them as well. I think it's a little bit one-sided to only go after the positive side of the story, as some of the other healthcare charities that you've talked to have elected to do. I think it's more unapologetic and braver to really explore both sides, and I think take a slightly higher ground here as well, because I think the initial campaign and thought for PCC was we were going to come out, we were going to challenge and agitate for change. And I think that restlessness has been a wonderful attribute for the brand, but I think there's another side to it now, and I think there is immense compassion and immense understanding and immense relief that can be passed on to people. And I think there's an imperative to do that as well, and make sure that really, anyone who is touched by this terrible disease, uh, PCC is going to be there for them to create the best possible outcome, whatever that may look like.
One of the things that you said to me when we first started talking about this is that you love the idea that PCC would meet people wherever they were. So if they had just been diagnosed and they wanted to fight and they wanted to know about every clinical trial there was and every possible opportunity there was, we would be there to support them and help them. If they were at a point where they did not want to continue chemotherapy, did not want to continue treatment, and wanted to really enjoy the rest of their days, however many they had, that we would also support them. That resonated with me, that we could be there for people throughout the entire journey. It remains to be seen how we fundraise against that, because, as I mentioned earlier, people in pancreatic, certainly cancer, in all of the organizations around the world, focus on hope, focus on selling purple pansies, and the idea that we're getting closer and closer. And every time we rise one percentage, there's a percentage less of chance that you're going to pass from this disease. There's so much celebration. But the reality is we've got so very far to go. And so we have to be there for people. We have to support people. And I've been shocked at what a dearth of support there is. And it really, for me, underscores why we have to be there. But as we go out and start fundraising, it will be interesting to see which individuals want to come forward and support that. I would imagine it's people who have been through the experience and don't want others to go through it. From a company perspective, I'm really interested to see what companies will come forward. The cost to society and to business when somebody is grieving the loss of a close family member is substantial. We estimate there are between 6 and 8 people for every person who dies who are affected by it in some meaningful way, and so are missing time off work, who are not capable of working at the same way they were able to. And so it becomes really important that these people are supported in a meaningful way right from the beginning, so potentially not have that long-term grief. And so I think about insurance companies that are going to bear the burden of cost when people are not able to work, and whether that might be something that they wanted to invest in. That would make sense to me, to help people through that part. We celebrate having these great benefits in Canada, whether they're public or private, and celebrate all the support we get for cures or for treatments. But what are the supports we get when we're not going to make it? One reality that's going to happen to each and every one of us. So what are your thoughts about how you're going to tackle death from an advertising perspective?
Very, very carefully. I, I think it's an important conversation to normalize and just let people know slowly but surely that um, it's taboo, and it shouldn't be. It can provide so much relief just to openly acknowledge it and have those conversations. And I think there are other ways as well for corporate sponsors to find their way into this and really assist as well. And I know, having lost my dad last year, that all of a sudden you're trying to deal with finance and estate planning, and when you are at your sort of most emotionally vulnerable point, and then suddenly you're hit with all this bureaucracy. And I think there is a role for kindness and compassion at that stage for people. And I think you're exactly right. Insurance companies, banks, etc., they know how to help people navigate through these moments in life. And I think they can be perhaps more proactive in doing so and putting that knowledge out there for more people to find and benefit from.
There's also such a sense of peace that can come into your life when you've had some of those meaningful conversations with people. I can tell you, having been diagnosed with cancer twice myself, um, I was extremely fortunate. The breast and thyroid cancer found very early. The survival rate's extremely high. I expect to live a full, normal 3 score and 20 or 4 score and 20, whatever it is. It must be 3 score and 20. It's longer for women, though, isn't it? I expect to live that full time. And yet, the diagnosis of cancer has forced me to have conversations with my child, with my loved ones, about how I want to go out, what I don't want to happen, what I do want to happen, how I feel about them. It's been a real blessing as well. And I think it can be that for other people. It can be an opportunity to have some really candid conversations about how you value people in your life and how important they are. We often wait till it's far too late to have those conversations. And often it's when you're at someone's funeral that you're speaking about the love you had for them. And hopefully you were able to say all those things to your dad before he passed. But if we don't set up a system or a process where you can have those types of conversations, then it gets lost. And that's part of the richness and the fabric of us as human beings and the experience we have with each other. And so it really is the one experience that we're absolutely all going to have. The two experiences, I guess, birth and death are the only things that we are all destined to have. And so we should be able to come together and talk about them. And so I want to be unapologetic about talking about death and about helping people through death. And I'm excited about how we're going to be able to do that together. So tell me about your 2023 and your unapologetic plans for it.
Well, it's an interesting year. I think it's a bounce back year after a lot of social and economic upheaval, and hopefully um, we don't get struck by the full force recession either, and hopefully that sort of blows by us. I think uh, the people of Canada could do with a bit of a break from turmoil and upheaval. So life has not been easy, but um, I'm an optimist. So for me, I think it's a good time now to start really firmly looking forward and getting out of that survival mode as an organization where you're just trying to take care of your people and get through these events. Now we can start looking forward and really locking into a vision about the kind of agency that we want to be culturally, the kind of work that we'd love to be making, and the kind of clients we'd love to be making that work for. And I think that's something that I'm going to be unapologetically focusing on now. And then within that, I think really unashamedly putting people first. And our people are our product. It's a funny industry where out of the minds of some people pop these ideas that sit in the cultural and communications and media landscape for a short amount of time, but they can have a lasting impact. And we want to make sure that we're doing good with that, and recognizing that really our people are the ones who are our product. So making sure that they're getting an environment that they feel excited to turn up to, making sure that they feel comfortable bringing their true selves to work. And then all the other usual business markers, I believe, follow. So that's sort of my unashamed flip from a business perspective. It's not about hard metrics and goals and growth. I think it's about, just making sure we put people first and trusting that everything else will follow.
Thank you. And something that we'll probably put at the beginning, which I should have started off with, I want to just talk about how fortunate Pancreatic Cancer Canada has been to work with the And-Partnership. This partnership began just about 8 years ago. You were TELUS's ad agency, and TELUS had lost a senior executive and had come on to partner with us. And I think Jack at the agency had offered to take a look at one of our brochures. And from there, we started apologetically asking for favors and for you to work with us. And your agency and you took a real leap of faith with us and did something that is outside of the norm in this industry. Often when a company like an advertising agency or any large company wants to do something pro bono for a charity, it's really on the back burner. It's the guy in the copy room who wants to be in advertising. He's the one we're going to let work on the campaign. And it's never the senior people who really work on it. And our experience with the And-Partnership has been the exact opposite of that. It has always been the senior people. It's always been clear that it is a priority, that it's a passion, that you're going to put the very best you have into it. You've called in favors over the years to get us freebies and ad space and videos. You've been an incredible partner with us, and we really value that. And so I want to make sure that I clearly enunciate that, how much it's meant to us and how it is not the norm for corporations to come forward like us. And you really have come forward in a big way. And the idea that we can come to you with these sort of bold ideas and concepts and that you will embrace them and run with them is exciting. And who else or who better to go to than an optimist to talk about death? So I'm thrilled that you describe yourself that way.
Thank you, Michelle. No, it's really kind of you to say, and I've got to say the passion that you have for the people that you serve is incredibly inspiring, and it's one that we share. Our agency is called the And-Partnership for a very important reason, which is the partnership that we form, believing that when we work very closely with our clients, we can do amazing things together. And what better a cause than yours to really put the best of our skills and abilities to the test and see if in some small way we can help you make the kind of difference that we all mutually want to see happen.
The And-Partnership is such a fabulous name. I will tell you, as an English major, I spent the first couple of weeks calling you the ampersand. and because that's what it was to me. So I was very glad to hear what it actually meant. Thank you so much, Andre. It's been a real pleasure to have this conversation with you.
Thanks as ever. I really appreciate your time, and I always walk away from these ready to really continue the fight on behalf of you, your organization, and the people that you serve.
Thank you. Have a great day. Thank you for listening. To learn more about us, visit www.pancreaticcancercanada.ca and stay tuned for the next episode of Unapologetic.